Benjamin Netanyahu is a terrifying person who causes any military action in Gaza to be illegitimate. We are punished for stepping out of line, which is, frankly, absolutely un-American. I'm entitled to have an opinion on the foreign policy of any nation I care to have an opinion on. I see the thing unraveling as the result of the behavior of fools, and I resent it.
Bret Weinstein just blasted Israel's policy in Gaza, calling it terrifying and horrific, and also having some pretty negative things to say about Benjamin Netanyahu, so he's going to fit right into this channel on this one. This is in a clip with Dad Saves America, awesome podcast, and he also gets into how this relates to anti-Semitism in the United States. So let's get into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I mean, first of all, I don't like living downstream of the policy of the state of Israel, right? I'm not an Israeli.
Amen.
I'm an American. I'm a patriotic American. I want Israel to succeed. I like the idea of Israel, but I'm concerned that it comes to be seen as speaking for and acting on behalf of Jews globally. And that means that when it behaves badly, there's a responsibility that flows to people like me who have zero influence over it. So,
I mean, that's obviously true. Like the impacts on Jewish populations across the West as a result of the conflict there is a fact. It is a fact. It is not what's happened on college campuses. Is a fact. So you're right. You're right that it matters. You're right that you can't really escape it as a Jew, as someone of Jewish descent.
Yeah, I can't escape it, and it makes me very uncomfortable because I'm watching an administration that I think is betraying the Jews of Israel and also the Jews of the diaspora. It is taking all of the goodwill that I know existed towards Jews in the aftermath of World War II, and I feel like it's being burned in the space of a decade.
Well, wow. The last part I totally agree with, but a few things to respond to here. I don't hope that Israel succeeds. I'm not for any kind of, subsidized ethno-state, apartheid state with my tax money going into it in the Middle East, which, by the way, ties us in many ways to a stupid entangling alliance that's drawn the U.S. into countless conflicts over there. It's not the only dynamic doing that. The banks and the military-industrial complex do that too. And I don't want it to succeed. I do agree with them that there's a spillover effect for what Israel does and how that kind of, is attributed to Jews throughout the world. But why is that? It's because all the propaganda serves to make Israel indistinguishable from Judaism. That's what they say that Israel it is. It's a representation of Judaism. But then they also get into all these wars with their neighbors, drawing the U.S. in, conducting a genocide in Gaza that's killed over 100,000 people. By their own admission, it's 62,000, but that doesn't count all the people that are lost and, other studies that put that number in dispute. And just the amount of sheer innocents that have died in this thing is so horrific. It's so disproportionate to the attack by Hamas on October 7th. And history didn't begin on October 7th, by the way. This is not Israel just defending itself. So you can see some of the consequences that happen because of those two dynamics. One, they try to make it indistinguishable from Judaism. And then two, you double down on this genocide in Gaza. Of course, you're going to have negative effects hoisted toward peoples that had nothing to do with this. A lot of Jewish dissidents exist. We cover them on this channel, and that is true.
And I also know what that is likely to produce, which is it's going to revive the pattern of history in which Jews are demonized, and it's going to return us to a place that if we were wise, we would invest everything in avoiding. And, so at some level, I know logically that the fact that somebody is Israeli doesn't mean that they are on Benjamin Netanyahu's team any more than I was on Joe Biden's. But empirically speaking, Israel has rallied around Netanyahu, who is behaving in ways that I think are right to cause concern. And frankly,
That's an understatement, by the way, if you're asking me, man. He's a murderous tyrant, guilty of corruption and fraud and war crimes. I hope he goes down for all three, but it looks like he probably won't. He's kept the wars going to try to escape those charges against him that he was going to go down for in 2019, and then that makes us wonder why Mossad knew about this attack a year in advance. This was widely reported, and stood down from it or ignored it or weren't able to address it, supposedly. And Egypt tipping Israel off to this attack 3 days in advance, and it's still going through. It makes you ask questions, man. At the very least, that's true.
What I said in the immediate aftermath of October 7th was, you have to get rid of this guy. This guy literally advocated for the supporting of Hamas to divide the Palestinians, right? He cynically wanted to support Hamas to divide the Palestinians. The Palestinians have a right to be absolutely livid with him because he stuck them with Hamas. Now, maybe what he did was inept and small and they would have stuck themselves with Hamas anyway, but we don't know that. What we know is that he cynically wanted to support Hamas, and now Hamas has engaged in this horrifying behavior. So my feeling is, in order to prosecute the war responsibly, you needed to get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu. That should have been job one. And I'm very troubled by the fact that it didn't happen. But even if you don't accept that, the fact that he presided over the frankly unimaginable failure of Israeli security that allowed the attacks to occur also means he can't be the person in charge of the war against Hamas.
Yeah, absolutely true. I just talked about that. He's also absolutely right about Netanyahu's support for Hamas. This is widely, again, documented, printed in many mainstream publications, both in Israel and the United States. If you watch the BB Files documentary, he gets into it, elaborating upon this grand strategy to keep his friends close and his enemies closer by shoveling $1.8 billion into the coffers of Hamas, using Qatar as an intermediary in the last few decades, and even leading up to 2 weeks in advance of October 7th. That is all absolutely true. I would just ask Bret to, just think about the idea, though, that this is like far wider than Netanyahu. It's about the right-wing coalition he created, the Likud party, which calls for absolute Israeli dominance over the region, perpetuation and pushing of the narrative that Israel's borders have to expand beyond what they are now. That's called the Greater Israel Project. Both Theodore Herzl and David Ben-Gurion talked about that in their own writings. This goes far deeper, man. This party, the Likud party, was created by Menachem Begin, a literal Israeli terrorist. If you don't believe me, if you think this is a conspiracy theory, read up on him too, man. This stretches far and wide. It's a mentality. It's a Zionist mentality that's the most extreme form of Zionism, which isn't even complacent with an Israeli ethno-state or an apartheid state. It believes that that state must expand. It must destroy the Palestinians, ethnically cleanse them if necessary, and go to war with all of their neighbors that they believe are adversarial to them, rather than allowing a peace process to unfold. This is discarding the Oslo Accords theory for the clean break strategy. That is a severe difference, even from the Israel that existed before the mid-90s compared to now.
So I'm now left with, Israel has rallied around a leader that I know from the COVID era is somebody I don't trust any farther than I can throw him. And frankly, I suspect is not a well-intentioned human. But they've rallied around him, and that means that the war is being prosecuted under the leadership of a person of very questionable moral character. And that sets this up for to be very triggering to those who are prone to have suspicions about Jews. So I'm watching something awful unfold, which is, a very avoidable set of errors in the Middle East is resulting in a radical shift in the way Jews are understood, which is making things radically worse. I'm seeing a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism. I'm also seeing a tremendous amount of legitimate questions about the relationship between the United States and Israel. Those are questions we have to be free to ask.
Certainly so, but we're not. I mean, the Israel lobby does everything they can to prevent us from asking those questions. Sometimes immediately lashing out, calling us anti-Semites if we do. Even Jewish people that are critics of Israel have called that. They've called that to Norm Finkelstein, the son of Holocaust survivors. I'm generally with him on this 100%. I'm a big metalhead, right? And if metalheads, throughout, hundreds of years developed a reputation for like murder or something like that, and they were murdering people en masse now, and I was a metalhead, an Iron Maiden fan, look at this. And, I didn't want any part of that, but they are causing people to look at me innately in a wrong-headed way, thinking that my moral culpability could be in question because of, my association on that. I would be frustrated too, man, if I thought that was murder and I needed to point it out. So I compliment Bret Weinstein for going in this direction and talking about this. I would say, though, it is, again, an understatement to call Netanyahu someone of questionable moral character. This is one of the greatest, not great, one of the biggest mass murderers in the modern world. And, he's a criminal in every way. And I don't care if you get to that point because of the UN's declaration of that and the ICJ's declaration of that, or because, you believe that the atrocities in Gaza independently are reason for that, or international consensus. I don't care. That's just true.
And those two things, of course, get intermingled. Mm-hmm. And my feeling is, we had it pretty good. And behaving as, honorable, patriotic members of our societies is a perfectly good way to be. And it did not involve you being any less Jewish. And now I see the thing unraveling as the result of the behavior of fools, and I resent it. Sure, I have an extra something in this story because I'm Jewish. There's definitely a way in which I personally resent being dragged into something that I have no say over. But I'm mostly preoccupied with this story as a human being. Mm-hmm. I think this story has the danger of undoing the human project. And I'm not okay with that. So in many ways, I wish that I was not Jewish in order to be able to discuss this and not have my Jewishness distract from the point I'm trying to make about the hazard here. All right? There's no part of me that doesn't like being Jewish. I'm fine with it. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'd be better off if I wasn't.
That's such an interesting take, and it just raises the idea or confirmation in my mind that it is the Jewish critics of Israel that are the bravest. People like Glenn Greenwald and Aaron Mate and Jeff Sachs and Dave Smith and Katie Halper, and there's so many others I'm going to forget to name some of them that are really good Jewish critics of Israel. How courageous it is to have their own, ethnic backgrounds and sometimes religious beliefs called into question because of that, because you're being insufficiently loyal to, our cherished Zionist ethno-state that we wanted to build in the Middle East through this globalist project in 1947 and 1948, playing out through the Nakba and the mass displacement of Palestinians. If you have insufficient, adherence or allegiance to that project, people are raked over the coals for this. Like, this probably destroys some families if there are really hardcore critics in a very, pro, right-wing Zionist household. So it's just something to think about that. But I totally understand where he's coming from. I'm not Jewish. I'm a Christian. But, I can see where he's coming from and why he would rather not be Jewish while talking about this.
But your other point, your observation about the fact that in Israel, you have a much wider range of opinion than you do here in the US.
Yeah.
I find that conspicuous and troubling. I've also come to understand the very same thing. There's a very wide range of opinions tolerated in Israel and somehow not tolerated here in the US.
Oh, for sure. And just to be clear, the person that first told me this was my cousin, who is works in the Catholic Church and was there as part of a Catholic excursion. And he came back and said, here's something that was just so striking to me, is that it's just, wow, there's a lot. We just get like a tiny drip of the discourse from a very particular angle here.
Well, I don't see it that way.
Well, let's see what he has to say, but I do want to chime in first and say, yeah, I think they're right about this. If you read Haaretz, which I do routinely, it's more of a dissident-oriented, more actually generally of a left-wing publication in Israel that is much more critical of Netanyahu and the right-wing coalition he's assembled. And it's so different than anything you get out of the mainstream media in the United States in so many ways. And it just shows the capture of the AIPAC and Israeli lobby in the United States, the power they wield over our elected officials, the bureaucracy, the president, etc. Just read a few articles in Haaretz. I guarantee you've never seen anything like that on CNN or ABC or Fox News, man. Just trust me on this one. This is really true. You know, these disputes actually play out in Israel in their media far more than they do in the United States, although the independent media is starting to change that a little bit.
I feel that in the US, it's not that we get a tiny drip and it's, distorted in its narrowness. It's that we are punished for stepping out of line, which is, frankly, absolutely un-American. I'm entitled to have an opinion on the foreign policy of any nation I care to have an opinion on. The fact that it happens to be Israel and I happen to be Jewish is immaterial. I'm an American.
Who's punishing you?
Well, the chorus, right? If I express an opinion like Israel is in danger of dragging us back into the Old Testament, Benjamin Netanyahu is a terrifying person who causes any military action in Gaza to be illegitimate, right? Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm allowed to have that opinion. But if I express that opinion, then the problem is I am somehow betraying Jews who are, in danger of pogroms and holocausts and all sorts of horrors.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, man. I'm with Bret on that. I think this issue goes far deeper than Netanyahu. He seems to want to keep the focus mostly on Netanyahu. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate that. I appreciate his criticisms toward Netanyahu, especially because he hangs in circles that are very pro-Zionist, actually. I had the occasion to walk by Bret one time. We were speaking at the same event. I never got to talk to him, but I did see him in person once. If I was to talk to him, I'd love to talk to him about this issue because it does seem like, he was more quiet about being critical of Israel until recently. This interview and an interview that he did with my friend Clint Russell recently really shed some light about where he's gone on this. But I just think this is such a problem that hurts Jewish Americans more than anyone. If you're going to wrap this regime in this notion that it's indistinguishable from Judaism in general, to me, there's like nothing more anti-Semitic than that, to, associate and ascribe the treachery of that government, especially right now and what they're doing in Gaza and what they've done in Yemen and Syria and Lebanon and Iran and Qatar recently with the murders there. If you're going to do that, that's only going to have negative ramifications on Jews when, so many people have been persuaded by the media and the Zionist forces and the Israeli lobby that, hey, there's just no difference. So, of course, this is going to cause anti-Semitism. If some people believe that that's just Jews and that's just how Jews act, and we're going to double down, defend it, look the other way, make excuses for it, say, oh, that's just their choice. And if you're Trump, never use U.S. leverage to, I don't know, stop some of that aid, like the $20 billion that the U.S. gave Israel last year. That's where I'm at, man. But generally agree with Bret here. I think it goes a little bit deeper than what he's saying. But at the same time, I think he's right on the mark here in terms of, U.S. policy toward Israel, the nefarious business of Netanyahu. But it's a deeper issue. But what do you think? Let me know down below. Is Bret correct about this? Do you think he should go farther on it? Do you see how there's a spillover effect from U.S. support to Israel when it comes to domestic issues and hate speech codes and things you're seeing talked about right now? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Dad Saves America, man. I love his podcast so much. John is a great guy, friend of this channel. We've talked routinely. He appreciates me. I appreciate him. Please go subscribe to his channel. He's awesome. Also, please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support my channel. And in return for that, I will give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.